Hello again. Whenever anybody suggests that European civilization and culture has created the world in which we live, with all the technological benefits that science has provided us with, some fool is sure to cry out, "What about the Chinese?" or "What about the Arabs?" The idea being promoted is that rather than being pioneers of medicine, navigation, or information technology, Europeans actually lag behind other cultures and often only advance because they use things devised by non-Europeans. This is nonsense, of course, although quite plausible until you examine the claims carefully. Take something which is often brought up, that the Chinese had magnetic compasses 1,000 years before they were used in Europe for maritime navigation. It is claimed that the compass was brought to Europe by Arabs, who first learned of their use from the Chinese. Fancy that! The Chinese were using compasses at around the time that the Romans invaded Britain, when we were living in mud huts. God, makes you think, doesn't it? By carefully leaving out the relevant details, it is quite possible to construct in this way a narrative which, while strictly speaking is true, is actually wholly misleading. I have many books on inventions of this kind at home, but since I'm in Prague, I shall have to give instead a link to the Wikipedia article on the history of the compass, for which I apologise. The Chinese did indeed come up with magnetic compasses 2,000 years ago. They used them for working out the best way to position the furniture in their homes and temples, according to the principles of feng shui, of which some viewers have doubtless heard. They began using them for this purpose at roughly the time that Julius Caesar landed in this country in 55 BC, and for the next 1,000 years that is all they used magnetic compasses for. A crank system of arranging furniture according to mad and unscientific principles. It simply did not occur to them for a moment that compasses could be used for anything else. For century after century, they just used them to foretell the future and decide which direction to lay their beds. This is what I meant by stagnation. It simply did not cross the mind of any Chinese person to use the compass for the practical purpose of finding the direction of travel at sea for 1,000 years. What were the Arabs using compasses for in the 13th century, after they had probably learned about them from the Chinese? Well, they found them very handy for the purpose of Qibla, which is to say determining the correct direction of Mecca when saying one's prayers. They were regarded as a great boon to Islam for this reason. Here are two cultures which, when using a very useful scientific instrument, thought at first only of using them for religious rather than scientific purposes. How very different was the case with Europeans. The second the compass appeared in Europe, it was swiftly adopted as a way of navigating ships at sea. It kick-started long-range voyages of exploration beginning in the late 12th century, pretty much around the same time that the Arabs and Chinese first started using compasses for navigating at sea. This is a single instance. I can think of many others. Different cultures certainly stumbled from time to time upon ideas, but almost invariably they were at a loss to know what to do with them, how to exploit them usefully. The instant those same things cropped up in Europe, they were at once seized upon and developed into something which would change the world. The next time somebody makes some silly claim about the wonderful things that this or that civilization came up with while we were still living in mud huts, just remember the magnetic compass. Do you think that it says anything about the psyche of a nation or ethnicity that, having come up with the idea, they kept using it for sheer nonsense for 1,000 years, and as it was only about the time that others like the Europeans and Arabs began using it for something worthwhile, that the Chinese themselves finally twigged there might be something more to this than feng shui. The people who spread these ideas generally do so because they are relying upon the ignorance of the average person. By saying that the Chinese have been using compasses for 2,000 years, they are telling the literal truth. But by not telling you what the Chinese were actually using them for, they are guilty of a sin of omission.